All right, what's up, guys? We're back here with another movie review, and today we are continuing our series of reviewing all Stephen King's adapted movies and the sequels to those movies, if there is any. And we are finishing off the It franchise with It Chapter 2, 2019. Now, I went to the theater and saw this last month, and I just watched it again. And again, I have a different point of view on this movie now. I always thought Chapter 2, It. Thinking of the best way to word this. I always thought Chapter 2, It was not nearly as good as the first one, and I actually think Chapter 2, It the ending does suck. And there's a lot of comments throughout this movie that, like, one of the characters in it, James McAvoy's character, he's an author, and everybody likes his books, but they all say the endings suck. And the ending to It, I'm sorry, as classic as the miniseries. Well, I wasn't really a big fan of the miniseries, as you saw in my review. I just wasn't. But the ending to the book in the movies and the miniseries, the ending's not that good. I mean, it's kind of, and the ending to this one isn't that good either. I mean, it's the best rendition I've seen so far, other than the book. The book will always be better, but well, the book's not better because of that one gangbang scene. But oh, god damn it. Oh god. But anyway, let's see here. So It Chapter 2 basically is, I don't know, this whole movie is just kind of, it has its moments, but I think the only enjoyable character that the only legitimately enjoyable actor here, and there's a lot of really good actors like James McAvoy, but the only actor that I really liked here was Bill Hader. Every other actor in this movie was very, I don't know, it just wasn't, it didn't hit all the right notes as the first one. This one just seemed kind of bland. I thought it was okay. I just don't really. This was a real big step down to the first one. The first one was so good. This one just kind of. I felt like, and those of you who have seen this and know what I'm saying here, it felt like half the movie was just them looking for their Horcrux part from Harry Potter. It's just, oh, and they get, in this movie is completely just a bunch of jump scares. I think this one has more jump scares than the first one. And some of them are good jump scares, but I don't know, just some of this movie seems kind of, like, the one part that I didn't get was, okay, so Stanley Uris is always the one of the group that commits suicide in the beginning of part 2 of the miniseries and this, and I can't remember, I think it happens in the book too. And the other one to die is Eddie. Eddie always dies. Even in the original miniseries, Eddie ends up dying. But see, the thing that I don't get about this, and that's why I didn't like the Dark Tower, and I've told you how much I despise the Dark Tower. If there was ever a movie that I hated among every others, and it's not just because of the acting, it's because of how they butchered the goddamn storyline of the Dark Tower. It's the Dark Tower. They butchered that story and left nothing but pulp. That movie is a shamble of garbage. It's okay. Only hardcore fans know what I'm about to talk about. Those of you who have read the Dark Tower and the Gunslinger books, the Dark Tower, the Gunslinger, read most of Stephen King's books, and you have to read a lot of Stephen King's books to fully understand the Dark Tower, because there's also a Dark Tower book series, along with graphic novels and comic books. It is a line of shit. And I spent time and read every bit of it. I've read all the Dark Tower stuff, and it's one of my favorite series. But those of you know what I'm talking about. The Dark Tower movie is basically, they just picked little things out of each of the... So there's multiple stories in the Dark Tower. Like the Dark Tower comic book series, the graphic novels, the Dark Tower, just titled The Dark Tower, are completely different from the self-titled Gunslinger books. But they do take place in the same universe. And sometimes the Gunslingers are in the area of the Dark Tower. That's the best way that I can describe it. And those of you who have read it know why it's so hard to explain. Those of you who have read it know why I'm having trouble here, because there's just so much. It would take a big ass TV show to cover every bit of the Dark Tower, and I don't even know if they could get it all. It's huge. It's truly a masterpiece of a book franchise, or multiple franchises. But that's why I don't like people over popularizing the story of it either, too. It's okay. I understand it is a popular movie, and I do like the movies a lot. But God damn it. How do I explain this? So there's this, I'm going to try to explain some of the lore of the Dark Tower so you guys, since those of you who haven't read it might understand this. So basically, you got this area. It's not a planet, but it's more of a dimension or something. It's more of a place. That's the best way that I can explain it. And in the middle of this place is this big black tower, and it's called the Dark Tower. And this tower has the ability... Oh, God damn it. Has the ability to open up gateways to multiple different dimensions, which is what connects all of Stephen King's stories. Now, outside of this area of the Dark Tower is a place called the Crimson, where all the demons like it, and where things slip through, spirits and entities like Christine, it, Carrie. That's where shit like that comes through. The vampires from Salem's Lot. All of Stephen King's stories are connected through this Dark Tower. Randall Flagg from The Stand. He Who Walks Behind the Rose, which I also think is Randall Flagg. But just all of these different things. Now, there's a couple exceptions, like Cujo, which is just the dog that was bit by rabies. And sometimes in these different dimensions, there are... Okay, so sometimes in different dimensions, there are pockets to where there are places that are somewhat connected to the Crimson, which would be the final confrontation place where its deadlights are.
that is, there are some theories going around. Well, I'm not sure how much of this is true because I don't think it's fully mentioned at all, but the place where it first showed up is a pocket to the Crimson. And one that I do know is true is the Pet Cemetery the Indian Burial Ground from Pet Cemetery is a pocket to the Crimson. But there will never, in the Dark Tower, the place where the Dark Tower is, there are full bodied entities coming out of the Crimson because the Dark Tower has more supernatural force around it. And another pocket in one of the dimensions to the Crimson is the Overlook Hotel from The Shining. That is another pocket to the Crimson. And there are okay, I'm going to try to explain this the best I can. This is going to get really confusing, but I hope you guys can catch up with me. So there are also these, and this was featured in the Dark Tower, but they completely butchered it. There are sometimes kids or people that can sometimes notice these things, is the best way that I can put it. And in The Shining, it's called The Shine. But it's not just the shine. It's in the Dark Tower series. Danny from The Shining has it. It's also mentioned in another Stephen King story called Dolores Claiborne. I don't know if you've ever seen it, or read the book. But people who have the shine are able to see these things. It's really hard to explain. And Randall Flagg is another big character in this universe because Randall Flagg is Randall Flagg's not the one in charge. I forget his master's name, but Randall Flagg is basically like the businessman or the messenger of this big bad demon from the Crimson. Now, Randall Flagg is a little different. Demons like it and Randall Flagg are some of the most powerful demons from the Crimson, and because they're so powerful, they have the ability to come in and out of the Crimson. But if we're talking about like something like I don't know, maybe something from The Mist. See, The Mist is another thing. The Mist is another place, is another pocket of Crimson. And the monsters in The Mist are... See, this is another thing. The Mist. The Mist is one of my favorite Stephen King stories. Because the creatures that come out of the mist are basically the creatures of the Crimson. And what am I talking about when I say that? Well, they are literally the mist is basically like a moving crimson field, and these monsters aren't just in the mist, they teleport into the mist from their crimson dimension to ours. So the creatures that you see in the mist aren't all of the crimson creatures in the crimson. Which is actually a lot of people who haven't read the Dark Tower books watching the movie or watching any other Stephen King movie, they're not going to get any of this. And you know what? I wouldn't expect them to get that it is from the Crimson either. I mean, it's a really confusing thing. But It Chapter 2, it's basically like I went over the original, so I'm not going to go over the plot of this. It's like it, except with more jump scares. There's a couple of changed things, but it's mostly the same, so I'm going to have to give It Chapter 2, I'm sorry, you guys are gonna kill me. I'm gonna have to give it a C. I just thought it was all right. I mean, it had its moments, but I thought it was a little bit too out there. And you know, It Chapter 2 has never, the second part of the It story has never been nearly as good as the first part. The first part is always more memorable when they're kids. That's just not the case with the second part. So remember to leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll be back here with more.